Hello, everyone, and welcome to Paranormal U. This week, we have a really exciting topic. We are actually going to go over data cross-checking and how we go about cross-referencing our data. Sorry, getting some feedback there. So this is a technique we've used for years, and I'm going to go over that and kind of go over how we utilize it and what it's done for us and kind of helped us along. As I mention every week, I don't claim to be an expert. I have used my years of experience in this field as my professional career with the training I've had, just try to formulate and come up with techniques, and hopefully the training goes over some of those. I would hope you would not rely on this as an alternate to seeking your own advice from maybe another professional, even another team, or especially if you have something that seems to be medical and you should be seeking medical advice. I can't stress enough that if it seems medical, don't wait for a team doctor. There aren't any professional or any experts in this field. We act as professionals we can. We bring in what we do, but just make sure you understand that we're all learning. It's a science that's being evolved over time. So the agenda for tonight, we're actually going to talk about the data, what data means. A lot of people I know call it evidence, but we're going to talk about data. We're going to talk about triangulation and what that means for us. The data cross-referencing technique that we actually use, or I sometimes call it cross-checking, so you might interchangeably. And then also some case examples of where this technique is helped us prove one way or the other which direction that it should go. So what is data cross-referencing? Well, it's a technique we use during data gathering and during the review process. We use it for all cases, especially client cases. Use it for all investigations we conduct. I'm not going to lie, it is a very time-consuming technique, but the rewards for using it have been huge and many times have allowed us to rule out man-made things, rule out natural things, and not have any question upon that. I didn't create this technique on my own. I actually did a lot of research, read a lot of books, used my own knowledge of, I come from an IT background, computer science, and as we did investigations, making changes to the technique for what did or did not work for us. So the technique itself sometimes could also be called triangulation. And what that means is, we'll define triangulation on the next slide, but what that means is it's a technique that we use during our data gathering and review. And I'm very clear on it. It starts with the data gathering process. The data event itself, I know a lot of teams actually call stuff evidence. For us, we actually call it data. So everything we collect is data. Where a data event then is something we feel needs to be looked at closer. So it could be a possible EVP, could be a shadow or a light that appeared on a video. It could be some sort of a light anomaly in a photo. It could be during the data logging process, we got a spike for EMF or a spike in a temperature or a drop in a temperature. So a data event means a specific piece of information that we are going to look at closer. Once we reviewed this closer, we then would move it into paranormal data versus just data we've gathered, or what some people would call evidence. Keep in mind, we rarely call something evidence. What we gather at the investigation, we call it data. Then if it seems to pass the first set of tests, so the investigators that are doing the data review flag it, it then becomes paranormal data, then it becomes possible evidence, and we rarely ever call it evidence. It usually stays in the possible realm. Triangulation itself is defined by uh, a qualitative reasoning group that is part of Northwestern University, and they define it as determining something's location by using other locations of things. So we use it by taking the data recorders, the digis, the cameras, maybe where we took the photos, and find out what else is around it and look at those devices. So if we picked up a possible EVP, say in the living room, we might look at recorders that were in nearby rooms so that we can triangulate and pinpoint the location of where the data source was. Excuse me. I actually learned this technique from a friend of mine who is in the FBI, and they actually use this technique with cell towers. So if they're trying to find a specific cell phone, they use 3 cell towers in the area to figure out and get the triangle area that the cell phone could be in. So we kind of do the same thing, using 3 points of data to try to cross-check data that we found. We use this process during the data review then to help us either weed out or have it float further to the top of being possible. For the paranormal research, triangulation then means using several devices, and I don't just stop at 3. I literally will look at every single recording that exact to be able to qualify it as paranormal data or disqualify it by maybe it's a false positive, we disproved it or debunked it. And we, again, do this against a data event. We review other data files even. So not just sticking with the audio, I look at the logs of what I wrote down of who's investigating where. I look at other photos that were taken in the area if possible. If there's a camera in the area, I'll try to find that exact spot and see what else might be going on. And so I use the other devices to try to also help escalate it or disprove it. So again, we try to look at least 3 data sources. So it would be a total, 3 additional, so it would be a total of 4. So the original recorder and 3 more. But then I also review every single investigators that were on that rotation. I review their recorders. So for instance, if there was 2 investigators on this rotation, I definitely look at the recorders that were on them to make sure it wasn't something from them, or maybe it will help me clarify. Then we review those recorders from all the investigators by also looking at any other data and then trying to rule it out. I can actually locate the exact moment in time on every single recorder so that I know what every single person was doing at that moment. And again, that's why it starts during the gathering portion of the technique. So the lead itself actually does this. So kind of how our process works is the investigators do the data review. They flag the data events they want the lead to look at, and takes the original files and looks at every single audio recorder that is within the same spot to help weed out. Then after the leads looked at it and ruled things out or left them in, then we bring it all back to the team, and majority rules, we decide if it moves on to be shown. So we have a fairly rigorous process to be able to do. Cross-checking technique itself starts by using a stopwatch. So when we get out of the car, we use the stopwatch too as our control. The main reason is if another recorder stops, or even if the control everything up by using the stopwatch. As I mentioned, every single one of our investigators is mic'd up. What we mean by that is every single investigator carrying a recorder on them with a microphone clipped to their shirt or their lapel, their vest, so that we can tell what that investigator is doing at all times. We don't review that data in detail. It's only used during the cross-check technique. For a typical case, for a typical investigation, especially a client one, we would gather anywhere from 50 to 60 hours of video, probably 90 to 100 hours of audio, and about 200 photos, maybe up to 1,000 if we're trail camera. But for the review, all the video and all the photos get reviewed, but the audio, it's only equals out about half because we don't review every single investigator's individual mic the entire time. This technique has become invaluable in the bigger scheme of things. It's helped us rule out a lot of what might have been deemed unexplainable data in the past. For instance, stomach growls. Someone moved a chair. Someone forgot they shut a door in the basement, so the attic thought it was an unexplainable. So just some food for thought. I know a lot of people think we're crazy because we mic up every person. And again, I know a few other teams that do it and swear by it like we do. Some food for thought. No matter how good you are at tagging, things get overlooked. They just do. You forget. Investigators will not all tag the same way. Some are diligent, some maybe a little more lax. People also don't remember tomorrow what they did today, the details of it anyway. So then if I need to go back and ask them, hey, do you remember shutting the door at 8 o'clock? They're going to be like, yeah, no, I didn't do it. But the recorder will tell me that story. You also might have somebody like me. I have asthma, so I cough a lot, especially in a lot of situations where there's a lot of mold or dust. Well, I can't tag every single one, or I'd be constant in some situations. I could be constantly talking. I'm going to be talking over stuff. So a lot of times, I just let the recorder then be that mechanism that will help weed it out when the person actually might flag it from another recorder. The number of recorders that we use and how we use them and the placement of them assists us in weeding out things that might slip through the cracks. I can't stress that enough. Again, it might seem crazy, but can't. I'll show you here in a little bit some. So our step one starts with the setup date and time. Every single night, the night before an investigation, I take out every single piece of equipment that can record that has a date and time stamp, and I double check it. Cross-reference it with my cell phone, because usually the cell phones are set to a master clock. But anyway, I double check those, make sure they have fresh batteries, and then double check to make sure they all have the exact same date and stamp. It's time consuming, but it's worth it in the Step two then is I start that master recorder at the car with the stopwatch. I document what time that is too on a piece of paper. I have a running log I use all night long. And so then what it ends up looking like is this. So I have a stopwatch, starts at 00, the first recorder is started, and then I write down, okay, it was 6:35 p.m. That way I don't have to remember. It's there. I don't have to think about it. Step three is after we've walked in, unloaded the car and everything, we start the remaining digis. These are the digis that every investigator will carry, all the digital recorders that will be in stationary positions, and any that we will carry with us on a rotation. So we basically line them all up. If there's 6 investigators and we're going to place 6, that means there's 12. We line them all up, the team helps, and we start them at the same time. And then I also document that time. And what I'm documenting is what time is on that original stopwatch from when I start those next set. That way, again, now we're in sync. We've all got the same times. They're all started at the same time, and it's documented. So kind of like what this looks like is something like this. So at 15:27, maybe when I started the second set of recorders, so I noted that in master log. Step 4 of the process is happens during the data review. So now the investigation's done. Every investigator has the data they're going to review. They do their data review, and then they document it by what file and the timestamp they want me to review closer, me being the lead, or if the lead is someone else. We record that timestamp as something like 2 hours, 13 minutes, and 46 seconds. And then they will make a note who is present, what room they're in, and then what's going on and what they think they heard. So basically, at 2 hours, 13 minutes, 46 seconds, Susan and Julie were in the northwest bedroom. Julie's talking about children and how she can't imagine one of her children passing away. And at that moment, you hear something like, and it's not heard by one of the investigators. So then when I get their notes back from the investigators, it actually has that. So then what I do as the lead is then I go and we use Audacity. That's another thing that's pretty important, is making sure all your team members use the same tool to review. That way 2 minutes and 2 hours, 13 minutes and 46 seconds is the same for everybody, because there are slightly different compressions with the different tools. So we use Audacity. I would then go find that moment that they indicated, and I would listen to it, see what I think. If it's something that I want to check out closer, then I'm going to start the cross-referencing part of the process. So then that's where I will start pulling up the data files for every single other recorder around, for the investigators present, any of the cameras, and I'll look at that exact moment, listen to that exact moment, and see if I can read things out. I can't stress enough how much this technique has given weight then to the data. So the paranormal data that we actually present in our library programs, that we occasionally will put online, not very often, but when we have that, it gives it more weight, because I've been able to weed out all of our investigators. I've been able to weed out all of the other areas. And lately, we've actually been putting a recorder outside of the location, especially for client cases, because then I can weed out any neighborhood activity that might be what we thought we heard. As you get better and better at data review, I think you start realizing what door slams sound like and things like that. But in case not, that's what the technique. So here's an example. So for the next few slides, we're actually going to go over some examples that have happened to us on investigations and what we've ended up finding. So this first one's an example of a photo type situation. So several photos were taken in this room, and there was a plant in the room, and it looked like some of the leaves moved. So from one frame to the next, it appeared to move for no apparent reason. The data event was logged in the file, then given back to me after the reviewer was done. And I made a note of the time. As I'm looking at the photo, I looked at what time the timestamp was on the camera, because it was a digital photo. And from that, I could go to the DVR then and look at that exact moment on the DVR, if there were cameras in the area. And sure enough, there was a camera in the same room. So then when I went and looked at the DVR files, I found out what the photographer had not noticed is that an investigator had walked in the room briefly and back out and caused those leaves to move. So then we were able to, from that case, debunk it. But there might be teams that would think it was paranormal because they didn't have a technique to rule it out. Again, people's memories. The photographer didn't remember the other investigator walked in. The investigator really didn't remember they walked in, but the cameras proved. This next example is audio-based. And so there was a faint whisper captured on a digital recorder during an EVP session where 2 investigators and the client was present. We try hard not to investigate with the clients, but sometimes we can't avoid it. So the data event was logged by the reviewer, sent in. The second recorder in the area was reviewed, and from it, very clearly, you could tell it was the client. The client whispered under their breath. So then there again, we were able to out. The next example, this one was a video based one. And on one of the cameras, one of the data reviewers noticed, so the investigator doing the data review, noticed that an office chair seemed to move or swivel in this one room. And it looked like it did it for no apparent reason. From the angle that camera was at, it looked like it just moved on its own. So the event was logged, sent in. I start pulling up the other cameras from the DVR, from the area surrounding it, and from the room itself. And what the original reviewer could not tell is that a cat had walked in the room and had jumped up on the chair and then jumped off. And when they did, it caused the chair to swivel around. But from that camera angle, you couldn't see that. But from the camera angle of the first camera inside the room with the chair, you could see that. So again, false positive. Next example was audio based. A voice was captured on a digi during an EVP session, and these, again, client was present, but it didn't sound like any of the voices of the people present at the time. As you know, as you do data review, you start learning the voices of your teammates. So the client might be a little harder because you don't hear them enough, but you definitely start learning your teammates. So it was logged by the reviewer, sent in. Second recorder was pulled up and looked, and it captured that same voice, and it was more clear what it actually said. So then it was looked at even further and further, and eventually we got to the point where we were looking at the actual frequency of it and realized it was a frequency below what normally the human ear can hear. So that's why we did not hear it at the time, and the recorder picked it up. So then we deemed it as an A. So again, going through a lot of rigorousness to get to that point, but it brings more certainty then to our data. So then in conclusion, as you can see from the examples, using this technique will allow you to have better data review, get your data elements where they're more finely tuned, and provide you a better picture of what happened at that moment so that your team can make a better and more educated decision. By not using the technique, some of these things might have slid through the cracks. An EVP might have slid through to a client that wasn't an EVP. A photo might slip through that wasn't there, and it improves your results. I can tell you, by using this technique, I'm to the point where I'm 99.99% certain that data that I show to a client or anyone else, that I can't explain it. It is something that I cannot explain because of all the equipment and all the data we've gathered. It's just not a person that was there. It's not something going on outside. It's definitely something unexplainable, which then makes it link towards the paranormal, and that's all we call possible. Can't stress enough how much this technique is really good process. So for next week we're going to be talking about basic safety and hidden dangers. You know, a lot of things have happened to people on investigations, everything from animals getting sick, even what first aid kits. So that's what we're going to talk about next week. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a shout, or you can go out to our website and look for more articles on the topics that we discussed today, as well as other topics. So